Welcome back to Parenting Roadmaps, a video series providing parents with short weekly videos focused on childhood development. This is episode number 6 of the preschool series. This video is part 2 on crossing the midline. What's the big deal? If you missed the previous episode, click on the link above to watch part 1, where we learned about crossing the midline and how it develops in a child. In this episode, we'll discover why crossing the midline is important, taking a closer look at how it plays a role in your child's brain and physical development. There is more to crossing the midline than what we see on the outside of the body. And in this episode, we're going to figure out what that's all about. Let's jump right in by taking a closer look at how crossing the midline plays a role in your child's brain development. Let's start with some basic brain facts. Fact number 1, the brain is divided into 2 sections, the right and left hemispheres. While they look the same, they are different and have different functions, which leads us to fact number 2. The left side of the brain controls the right side of the body, and as no surprise, the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body. Fact number 3, different areas of the brain handle specific tasks. While the act of a child coloring looks simple, the brain is actually trying to make lots of decisions. How far do you draw a line? How hard do you press on the paper with the crayon? Which color are you going to use next? Each one of those decisions is made in a different area of the brain, either on the left or the right side. So now we know that these 2 sides of the brain are very busy, controlling the body and making decisions. For any person, not just a child, we need these 2 sides of the brain to talk to each other so that our bodies can be coordinated and organized, right? Which leads us now to fact number 4. The corpus callosum connects the 2 sides of the brain and allows the 2 sides to communicate with each other. From this cross-sectional view of the brain, you can see that the corpus callosum is a wide, thick, C-shaped nerve fiber bundle. The corpus callosum, also known as the brain's neurological superhighway, grows rapidly during the preschool years, and it actually doesn't finish developing until a child is around 12 years old. And finally, fact number 5, bringing us back to crossing the midline. Crossing the midline is an action that requires the left and the right sides of the brain to talk to each other. So a preschooler who crosses the midline, they are using and strengthening that developing corpus callosum. Crossing the midline helps build communication and coordination between the 2 hemispheres. Simply put, crossing the midline builds a stronger brain. In the last episode, I promised to connect crossing the midline to topics already covered to illustrate how crossing the midline is important in so many aspects of your preschooler's development. So let's look at self-regulation. Remember how we talked about it's important to build your child's emotional vocabulary? Broadly speaking, verbal skills are considered to be handled by the left hemisphere, and dealing with emotions generally handled by the right hemisphere. So putting it all together, crossing the midline builds a stronger connection between the 2 sides of the brain, which means a stronger connection between the verbal and the emotional sides of the brain, and therefore better supports your child's ability to self-regulate. Now looking at physical development. One important milestone that comes out of crossing the midline is hand dominance. Is your child going to be right-handed or left-handed? Your first impulse might be to look at a child who is using each hand equally and think developing strength and skill in both hands is a good thing. But as the child gets to be around 3 to 4 years old, it's important for them to have one hand starting to show dominance. And here's why. These kiddos, as they enter kindergarten and elementary school, are going to need wrist, hands, and fingers ready for handwriting, cutting with scissors, and many other activities requiring fine motor skills. As we now know from our discussion in the last episode on bilateral coordination, their hands and fingers don't start off that strong or that coordinated. They need time to build strength and coordination. And guess what helps with that? Crossing the midline. Children who easily and spontaneously cross the midline during play will give their dominant hand the repeated opportunities it needs to build strength and coordination so that the preschoolers are ready to take on the fine motor skills needed in school. So, our review for today: children who cross the midline are working on building stronger brains, and crossing the midline plays a crucial role in developing hand dominance. As a lead into our next episode, there are a variety of reasons why kids can struggle with crossing the midline. And without knowing it, these kids will figure out ways to position themselves so that they can avoid having to cross the midline. We will take a look at some of them and discuss some of the many ways that you can support your child's ability to cross the midline. I'll see you again for our last episode on crossing the midline, and as always, remember to enjoy the journey.